Chapter 2. Once I return to my room, I pull my dirty blonde hair into a ponytail, smoothing out the strands rustled by the wind. I watch for the light to click off under the bathroom door, preparing for Jacqueline to bounce into our room. Jacqueline and I have been suite mates since level 5. All the years prior to that, we were in a massive level 0 through 4 sleeping room with caregivers, so still together. Always together. It's the 1 ounce of remaining hope I have in the Elders Board's decisions for the Futures ceremony. They have done a good job with the suite mate selection and understand our friendship is important. I can only trust they've been taking accurate notes on what's good for the rest of our futures as well. Usually Jacqueline's enormous smile and laugh are contagious the moment I see her. Today is not the same, and she can read me easily. When she bursts through the threshold with her classic toothy smile, she immediately stops in her tracks. "You didn't sleep again." "Shh." I glance down the hall before closing our room door. "You can't be saying those things out in the open." "Relax, no one is around. We're good. Jacqueline leans against my dresser, crossing her arms over her chest. Her eyes narrow in on me, and even with her furrowed eyebrows and wrinkles at the crown of her nose, she is flawless. "Maybe you should have the doctor check you out again. It could be more normal than you think." If Impetus found out I wasn't sleeping, I would become the clinic's newest science experiment. I already went through multiple tests once before when they thought I was ill because of the atypical color of my eyes. I am marked to have brown eyes, like most Impetus residents. But as each year passes, green has filtered into the brown, more noticeable when outside than any other time. I've learned to angle away from the sun when looking at people, to hide that I'm a little different. I roll my shoulders to shake off the thought of the tests and their questioning. I can't do that again. Besides, another hit on my health record so close to the future ceremony will hinder my chances even more for getting paired. I have a lot working against me as it is. Maybe it's in the air or food. Maybe you're not the only one experiencing it. How many times have you seen insomnia come across the clinic paperwork? I think we'd be one of the first to know if it's normal. For the past few years, Jacqueline and I have worked more hours at the clinic office than anyone else. If we are in school during patient hours, we must evaluate the notes of the appointments we missed as part of our work-study lessons to learn all facets of the office. "Yeah, okay, you win. But you're normal, I'm sure. It's safe to say I would know that." Smirking, I respond, "I don't think you've been hitting the books enough to know." For years, rumors have floated that Jacqueline is in line to be the next doctor, since the current one is nearing the age of respite. Despite being the most intelligent person in our class, she has clarified that if she were in charge, she wouldn't choose that future for herself. Flipping her long, curly ponytail off her shoulder, she sighs. "I have been busy with other things," which causes both of us to laugh. We know Ethan is the sum of those other things. You know, if they pull me in for more tests, no matter what the outcome, they won't choose me to take part in the reproduction of the future. I will be deemed ultimately and hopelessly diseased. Jacqueline snorts in response as she shifts her weight from one foot to the other. We're all a little diseased in some way or another, right? That's one of Gavin's favorite lines. For a brief moment, her comment blends my realities. She knows everything too. Our knowledge about life is finally equal. Jacqueline, Gavin, and the things we talk about, including the lies of Impetus, all exist in the same space. I have desperately wanted to speak to her about this for so long I almost respond with, "I wonder if the other communities operate like this." But she cuts me off before I can open my mouth. "You most likely need an adjustment to your remedy dosage. It may not be a bad thing." She shrugs casually, and that's when my daydream ends, as I realize she regrettably knows only what Impetus has told her. The naivety shield. That's the problem with me having 2 best friends in different lives. Sometimes it's a challenge to keep them straight. I'm constantly teetering on the edges of a Venn diagram, truths in different worlds that cross, but only in certain areas. However, Jacqueline is probably right about the dosage increase. I take 2 large pills 3 times a day as it is. Jacqueline and I compared pills side by side once before, and mine are bigger than the ones she's required to take, which was the result of the last round of tests performed on me. They will no doubt change my doses or pill sizes again, since that seems to be the easiest solution to everything. What's worse than me not sleeping in the eyes of Impetus are the dreams. I can't tell anyone about those, not even Gavin. Most of the dreams are as though I live in the before, with actual physical and emotional feelings. Even if we feel an ounce of something, we aren't educated to know what it is. It's only when Gavin first started playing the feelings game with me that I connected the dots. I shouldn't want to experience them. I can see why there was so much suffering in the before. But they keep finding me. And oddly, the older I get, the less I want to turn away from them. Because all I want is the truth. Gavin simply makes things better. And despite some shortcomings, like not being able to share information with Jacqueline, I enjoy having a secret friend that no one else in the community knows. Our first meeting was initiated by me breaking an Impetus law, and our relationship has since formed on continued transgressions. He's my idea of freedom, when I sometimes wonder what it would be like to live on the outskirts of Impetus, just like him. While walking back home after a level 6 field trip to the cooperative, a bee buzzed past my ear and caught my attention. Jacqueline was talking to Ethan, so didn't notice me leave. We had identified bees and their pollination process earlier in school, so I was eager to see them in action. Although much of the wildlife had become extinct during the wars, insects survived, which intrigued me. I wanted to know what made them so special. Veering off the path separating from everyone else, I followed the bee to the edge of the thickets. Even as a little girl, I easily disappeared inside my head if a thought consumed me, unable to think about much else until I could find closure. So as the bee pushed its way through the thickets, I followed absent-mindedly, not once considering the law I was about to break for the very first time. The bee landed on a flower patch a few feet from the outside wall. I lay down on my stomach and watched as it fluttered about, elegantly dipping and diving among the flowers. It reminded me of the way the younger children in Proper's A splash around as the caretakers give them their evening baths. A loud crunch woke me from my hypnosis. A boy leaned against a tree, eating an apple. He looked different from the other boys in Impetus. His brown hair was shaggy and unkempt, defying the closely shaven hair requirements for all males. But his eyes stood out the most. Even with the distance between us, the bright blueness of them had me mesmerized. I had only seen that color in the sky, not in anyone's eyes. That's when the realization struck. I was outside of Impetus's walls. The boy was intently watching me, so I didn't want to make my mistake too evident in case he was compelled to report me. Instead, I scooted my body back until I could verify that my feet were indeed under the thickets. Hopefully, that still counted as being obedient. "That's a bee." His voice was deeper than the other boys I knew. "I know. We learned about them last week." "You're in school?" I glanced up at him, expecting an immediate apology for asking a question. He just stared back, chewing. Clearing my throat, I responded, "Yes, level 6. I sat up to face him, keeping one hand gripped on the branches, the safe zone. "You must be in school too." He shook his head. "You can't be over 18. He snorted. "Hardly. I'm only 11. I silently counted. He was 5 years older than me. Why wasn't he in school? "What's your name?" he asked. "You are not allowed to ask that." I chastised him. He must have never learned the rules if he wasn't in school. He rolled his eyes and threw his apple core on the ground. Well, my name is Gavin. I hesitated, but then replied, My name is Evangeline. I looked at the apple remains indented with his teeth marks and whispered, You should pick that up. They will punish you. Evangeline. Pretty name. He studied me carefully while ignoring my comment. Do you even know where apples come from? From the cooperative, I announced proudly. That was where our field trip was earlier, so I had just learned about the daily operations that provide Impetus with what it needs to meet everyone's basic needs. Where does the cooperative get them? The trees. I turned my attention back to the bee, signaling the end of the conversation. We had gotten out of school early with the field trip, so I didn't want to be grilled on everything I learned. I wanted to enjoy the rest of the day. Gavin stepped closer until I looked up at him again, wondering how much closer he would get. Do you really think those trees are enough to supply your entire community with apples almost every single day? Recalling the rows of plants we saw, the apple trees only consumed 2. If I had an apple a day, and everyone else in Impetus did as well, they'd have to grow overnight. Sneering as he watched confusion cross my face, he said, Doesn't add up, does it? Why is everything out of his mouth a question? He could get in bad trouble if anyone heard him. Surely they have supplies stored. Impetus always prepares for our future. I repeated verbatim the line they announce over the intercoms multiple times each day. Gavin squatted to the ground to get eye level with me. Blue eyes. I had never seen blue eyes before. Would you like to know the truth about where apples come from? I couldn't ignore this boy's messages. He was confident, appearing more like an authority figure than an 11-year-old boy. A question I never once considered now ransacked my mind. I needed to know the answer. Yes? Another smirk. Okay, I will tell you, but you have to ask me. Apparently he didn't comprehend questions containing what, why, where, when, or how are prohibited. I can't. That's not allowed. Seriousness instantly replaced his joking demeanor as he encouraged softly. You can, Evangeline. Impetus just tells you not to. Not the rest of the world. And you're not in the community technically right now, are you? I took a deep breath and looked behind me, wiggling my fingers stuffed under the thickets. I couldn't see anyone else through the bushes since they were so compact. He was right. I was outside the walls even though I shouldn't have been. Whispering, I asked, Where do apples come from? Chuckling and raising his eyes to the sky like he just won a bet against it, Gavin replied, They are grown in a different community far away. During the sleeping hours, they fill the cooperative. That's why the Lightstones exist. Secret operatives need the light. There's a reason you all are locked in at night. Not everything is done specifically for your safety. I barely heard anything else once he confirmed another community exists. Have you seen that other community? Is that where you're from? Why doesn't anyone talk about it? How far away is it? I quickly sat up straighter and covered my mouth with my hands, but I was too far gone to care about breaking the rules from my question asking any longer. Letting my hands drop in my lap, I continued with the biggest ones of all. Why don't they tell us about it if the other community helps us? Why do they isolate us? Gavin stood again, rocking on his heels. You won't be punished asking questions out here. It's a good thing to do. He glanced over my head and then brought his blue eyes back to me. It's getting dark, Evangeline. You should get back home. He was right. The sky no longer looked like his eyes since the darker tints had taken over. The bee had long since flown away from the flower, and I hadn't noticed. I jumped to my feet and searched for an easy place to crawl back through to Impetus. My mind reeled with questions that weren't getting answered. Before leaving, I squared my shoulders and turned back to Gavin, trying to appear older than I was. "Where are you from?" Gavin smiled, acknowledging my boldness to ask another question. "Tomorrow, I will tell you that and anything else you want to know. Okay, Evie?" I scrunched my nose at him before pushing through the thickets. No one had ever called me anything other than Evangeline. Evie sounded so weird. I was luckier than I knew at the time that I slipped through to the other side without being detected, since I wasn't very careful. I walked back to Proppers B, my mind filling with questions I was never before allowed to ask. Gavin said he would tell me more the next day, but I didn't think I would return. Not until I talked to Jacqueline. When she told me there was no way a young boy could live in the woods by himself, that's when I decided I'd go back to make sure he existed. And if he did, I would only get a few questions answered and never return again. That night, I struggled to fall asleep, the first of many sleepless nights to come. Halfway through the sleeping hours, I could swear when I held my breath, I heard the faint sound of a loud machine rumbling. I imagined it was the other community dropping off food for our cooperative. I made a mental list of questions to ask Gavin the next day, like where he's from, and why his eyes are so blue, and why Impetus would withhold information from us. Slowly, I finally drifted to sleep as endless questions scrolled like credits at the end of a movie. When I returned the next day to prove the boy in the woods was real, I struggled to find the same opening the bee had smoothly guided me through before. Few penetrable places exist in the thickets, an additional fact Gavin later taught me. The possibility that the bee led me to one so effortlessly must have been a sign we were meant to meet, at least according to Gavin. He believed in something called fate. I never understood that. Things are all by choice. When you are given choices to make, that is, unlike Impetus deciding everything for me. I finally located a tiny opening right as Mr. Frank appeared with a hose in his hand. I buried myself among the leaves, unmoving, watching blood trickle across my left hand scratched by a limb during my dive in. I thought Mr. Frank saw me at first. Holding my breath, expecting him to search for me, I was careful to refrain from excess noises. After a few moments that felt like hours, he eventually walked away, his typical humming following. After an inner debate on whether I should return to Impetus or continue on my risky journey, I pushed through the thickets to peek at Gavin. Maybe I'd get one question answered, and then hurriedly return to the safety of the community. Innocent enough. When I poked my head out, sitting on the ground with his back to the same tree as the day before, was Gavin. Possibly sleeping, his eyes were closed as his chin rested on his folded arms. I watched him for a silent moment. I had never seen a boy sleep before, or observed one in such a hidden way. Something was fascinating about it. Or maybe it was him. "Are you entertained?" He broke the silence, yet his eyes remained shut. "How did you know I was here?" Gavin opened his eyes, the blue brighter than the day before. Grinning, with a dimple appearing in his chin, he commented, "You're already comfortable asking questions, I see." I didn't even realize I asked a question. They had been running in my head continually since the moment I met him, that I wasn't distinguishing them from my other thoughts. I would need to be more careful in Impetus. Pushing tangled strands of hair out of my face so I could see better, I responded, "It's your fault." Within a few strides of his long legs, he was suddenly right in front of me, grabbing my hand. "You're cut." I immediately pulled it back. "It's okay." "No." He clutched my hand again, rotating it to see the wound better in the sun's light. "Come here." Gently he took it in his and pulled me carefully through the rest of the thickets. "Don't. I should get back," I protested. Gavin didn't respond and towed me to a log. Reaching into the wooden opening, he pulled out a backpack concealed inside and rummaged through it until he found a tiny bandage and a bottle of ointment. Dabbing cream on my scratch, he lifted his eyes to mine and asked, "Does that hurt?" I raised my eyebrow, confused by his question. "Never mind," he muttered, and covered the glistening cut with the bandage. "Why would you ask if it hurts? That's silly." "No reason." Gavin threw everything in the backpack again and stuffed it in the log. "Just a game I play, I guess." However, I wouldn't let it go. I had never been asked something so peculiar before. Gavin said he found a book from the before that discussed all the feelings that once existed. I told him I wanted to read it, but instead he wanted to teach me what he learned by playing a game. That's when the feelings game was birthed. By the time I left him that day, I had inherited top-secret information that no one else in Impetus knew. At least none of my other level mates. It was akin to being the first to discover artifacts during our annual digs, the draw of knowing things before information was revealed to others. Many of my questions remained unanswered, though. Gavin was skilled at avoiding certain ones. I thought I could get him to answer them eventually, if I kept returning. So I did. Almost every single day. And Gavin was always there. Although he stayed mute on some questions, he selectively answered others. Thanks to Gavin's help, I became really good at navigating the ways to get in and out of Impetus unseen. As each year passed, though, I learned more about the dangers of my actions. But by that time, I was hooked to meeting with Gavin. 12 years ago was the start to Gavin and me, and it's how we've been every single day since.